Hi everyone. Thrilled to welcome you to today's session. Let us wait a little bit. Let us wait a couple minutes while we we allow everyone to join. So thank you very much for everyone already to be so punctual to today's session. Really appreciate it. There's a lot of things to cover today, so really happy to see already this amount of people joining for today's amazing session with Christian. Let us wait slightly, 30 seconds, and we'll get this going. All right. So, yes, I see. Well, hello from Tampa. Yes, that's always awesome. If you can guys tell us where you're talking to, that always helps to see, to know who are we talking to today. So let's get it started. Oh, Toronto. Hi, Stephanie. Hello and welcome to the second session of our masterclass with Christian Wadding, covering everything you need to do in order to increase the quality of your decisions amidst increasing macroeconomics uncertainty and laying the foundations for a strong annual planning kickoff. Today, most finance leaders are treating operational speed as a new KPI. And an underpinning operational speed is being able to make fast decisions. I'm your host, Jorge Yuk, co-founder and CFO at Abacum, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all to what we promises to be an engaging session. If this is your first time joining us, don't worry. You will be able to access the recording of the session after it takes place. In this 45-minute panel, we'll cover advanced analysis concepts, followed by an audience Q&A session. Please submit your questions in the chat, and we will address them at the end. Don't hesitate to send them at any point along the session, and we will be covering them, when after our talk. Today with me, I'm extremely honored and privileged to be welcoming Christian. Christian is an FP&A expert with over a decade of leadership experience at multinational companies and fast-growing tech startups. Today, Christian directs the FP&A certificate program at the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania and shares his insights through his own training programs as the founder of the FP&A Prep and on LinkedIn. Over 30,000 finance professionals and business leaders subscribe to his weekly newsletter, FP&A Tuesday. You can discover more about his work at fpnaprep.com. So welcome, Christian.
I'm really excited for being here, Jorge. I appreciate it.
No, the honor is ours. To start today's conversation, actually, we're gonna drop a quick poll to get us frame on what we'll be discussing. So all of you can see already how often does your finance team currently leverage leading indicators in your forecasting? We'll give you 30 seconds to answer to the poll. All right, I should be actually maybe watching my. Okay, awesome. So cool.
Okay.
What do you think already, Christian, about these answers?
Yeah, so most people use it occasionally on an ad hoc basis. Over 20% use it rarely or not at all. So yeah, so that's actually what I expected. It's definitely good to see that a third of you are using them regularly already. For those of you who not use them regularly yet, I hope that by the end of the session, you feel better equipped to use leading indicators really whenever you're doing forecasting, because they really are that valuable. And I'll go more in depth on this in a moment.
Really happy to hear that. So let's get it started then. So to better predict changes to trends in uncertain environments, finance teams need to step out of the finance silo and use leading indicators, right? As we were saying. Can you explain what leading indicators are and how finance teams can make the most of them?
Yeah, so there are lagging and leading indicators. Lagging indicators, that's typically everything that has a dollar sign attached, what you get from your ERP system, so your revenues, your expenses. They're lagging indicators because they tell us about performance that has already happened, right? They tell us about the past, essentially, when you look at your actual expenses and revenues. Leading indicators, on the other hand, are metrics that tell you about how revenues and expenses will behave in the future. So those are your operational metrics, the metrics that often don't have a dollar sign. And a few examples. So there are internal leading indicators and external leading indicators. On the internal side, it could be, for example, the number of calls to your consumer hotline. If that shoots up all of a sudden, that might mean that there's a problem with your product quality, which could have a negative impact on revenues in the future. Or it could be the number of visitors to your website. If they go up, revenue may go up, right? If those are high quality visitors. And then it could also be, for example, the level of your inventory, right? If your inventory all of a sudden is much lower, then that might mean issues in the supply chain or a higher demand. And that's just a very short list. I'll talk about in a moment how you can find more. But there are also external leading indicators. Those are the ones you often read about in newspapers. It could be your economic indicators like employment rates or inflation that can have an impact on your business. But the thing is that what your leading indicators are really depends on your industry. So I wish I could give you a list with all the leading indicators you need, but it differs by industry. And it doesn't just differ by industry, it also differs according to the development stage your company is in, the size of your company, your strategy even, and the tactics you employ. But rather than just giving you a list of leading indicators, I actually want to teach you how to come up with them yourself. And before I go there, I want to make it really clear why this is so important, because I truly think that in 2025, finance teams shouldn't just look at what they're getting out of the ERP system, right? You need to step out of that finance silo, which means that first of all, you need to get access to the other metrics that the people across the company, in sales and marketing and product and engineering, you need to get access to those metrics. And then you need to figure out how you can connect them to your financial results. That's so important because the business environment is just getting more uncertain, it's getting more complex, getting more volatile, and that means that we need to step up as finance professionals as well, and look at more data than just the financial data. But how do you get started, right? And what I would recommend is use AI. I think that brainstorming potential leading indicators is a great task for AI, because even if it makes suggestions that aren't a good fit, that aren't great, that maybe are even wrong, you will find out, because you will then pull the data and test the leading indicators before you use them. So that's actually a great use case of AI. But so when I teach FP&A, we also often look at, okay, how do we use AI to help us with that? But the most common mistake I see people make is that they treat AI, and with that I mean, your ChatGPT, your Copilot, your Gemini, Claude, whatever your favorite tool is. They treat AI a bit like they treat a Google search, right? They open it up and then they type 3 or 4 words, maybe 1 sentence, and then people are sometimes surprised that the quality of the results they're getting isn't where it needs to be. And so I actually want to share an example of how I would approach this task of let's brainstorm potential leading indicators in AI. So give me a moment while I open this, while I share my screen.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Christian.
Yep. So here you can see ChatGPT. I zoomed in a bit. For those of you who know ChatGPT, I'm using the O4 mini model, which currently is one of their up-to-date reasoning model. So a reasoning model is a model that thinks a bit more, that takes a moment before it gives a response. And here's how I wrote the prompt. I need your help with brainstorming a list of potential leading indicators. My goal is to become forward-looking and spot changes to trends earlier. So you say clearly what you want to do and what your goal is. It's really important to give that context. And then I give even more context. I'm an FP&A manager at a software as a service company. We provide software that helps small business owners create websites quickly and easily. I chose that specific example because I actually worked and led an FP&A team at a website builder company at Squarespace. We sell our subscriptions directly to consumers. Our marketing team runs ads on social media and Google search to send people to our website where they can purchase a subscription or enroll in a free trial. So it's important that you give as much context as makes sense. And I found for this particular prompt, I wanted to give the AI a bit more of an idea of how this company works, right? At a high level, how we're going about getting customers. Because if you have a business to business model, for example, your leading indicators will look very different than a business to consumer business model like we have in this example. And then I say, list 10 potential leading indicators that can help me forecast revenue, provide a short rationale for each leading indicator, and state how you measure it. So after you're done with explaining what your goal is, context, be very specific about what you're trying the AI to produce for you and how you want that result to look. And now let's see what we get.
I'm nervous.
Yeah, you never know. This is life, So let's see. Okay, thought for a few seconds. Get 10 potential indicators. Website traffic volume and quality. Okay, that's a good one. It shares the rationale, how to measure, track total sessions, segment by channel. Free trial signups. That's a pretty straightforward one as well. Trial activation, onboarding completion rate. So now we're getting a little bit more in depth, so it suggests don't just track how many people have free trials, but go a level deeper and say, okay, they sign up, but are they actually using that trial, right? Are they actually completing the onboarding? It even gives a formula that you can copy paste into Excel. Time to first value. So how long does it take them to actually build the website? That can tell you something about product quality, right? Which can then tell you something about conversion rates and sales, trial to paid conversion rate, marketing funnel engagement metrics, okay? Very interesting. Product usage intensity. So I find that this is usable because it gives you a list of 10 different ones. Probably you'll find that some of those are obvious, so you're already tracking them, right? So I'm sure, any business to consumer company tracks website traffic and free trial signups when they have them. But there are also a few more in-depth metrics here that maybe you aren't tracking yet, and that then you can take the next steps, right? And the next steps here would be to say, okay, product usage intensity. We're not really tracking that yet. The first step then is to see, do I even have the data, right? Now you would probably talk to the product team and see, okay, can we get the data for daily, weekly active users? Probably the question is yes. Can we track adoption rates? Can we set thresholds? So setting thresholds might be a little bit more advanced. It depends on how you're getting the data. And then if the answer is yes, you can get the data, the next step is to do a correlation analysis where you look at, okay, if my product usage intensity in the past, when it went up, did that mean that then also for this cohort, did it mean that then also the conversion rates to a full from free trial to paid, that also was higher than in the periods before? And when you can establish that there seems to be a correlation, then that you have a new leading indicator, and it's something you can track and fine tune as you update your forecasts. So that's how I would approach that.
That was pretty cool, Christian. Thanks a lot. Clearly, you need to need to learn about your business, ask the relevant questions, get some help from ChatGPT, and get into that 100%. So in our last webinar, where we covered financial analysis foundations, you introduced your variance analysis framework. Can you briefly recap the takeaways? So
Yes.
wise, yes, awesome.
Sure. So we discussed it at the end of the last webinar, but because we are soon going into more advanced topics, it's actually a good idea to briefly recap that. So let me share my screen here.
Thank you very much once again.
So when I think about variance analysis, to take a step back, variance analysis means comparing actual results to your forecast, to your budget, to your prior year, right? You do the comparison to budget to see how are we doing versus our original commitment that we gave to stakeholders at the beginning of the year. The comparison to the prior year helps us tell the story of what changed. Mostly that's useful for the external perspective because investors look at the comparison to prior year because that's often all the data they have. And then comparison to the forecast is what I would argue maybe the most relevant one from an internal decision-making point of view, because it tells you what was surprising, what didn't you have in the forecast, what could indicate that things are not going as expected, which will then help you make decisions about how to move forward with the business. And when it comes to figuring out, okay, what is that variance, right? There's the what, the why, and the so what. Let's take a look at a quick example. The what could be, well, professional fees are unfavorable by 251,000 in this month. Excuse me. The why could be, well, the increase in professional fees is primarily driven by Deloitte. There are 267,000 unfavorable. And the challenge is that, when I work with finance teams, I often see them stop here. Because you might argue that, well, we explained why there's a variance, right? It's driven by Deloitte. We give a very specific example. We say that that's driving 267,000, which is essentially the entirety of the difference. So we are good to go, right? We are done.
Yes.
But I would argue that this is really not that helpful for decision making, actually, because the so what is missing. So what do I mean with the so what? Well, if you dig deeper into the data, you might figure out that the cost increase isn't due to more billable hours, but rather to a significant price increase. We should compare the new price to other audit firms and consider a tender. So this is where maybe you open up the contracts, you really step out of your finance silo, you look at operational metrics, and you see that it's not just that we are maybe more complex this year and they just built more hours, they actually ramped up the price. So now we can make a concrete recommendation, which is maybe we should consider other audit firms and see, is there a big difference in pricing now that the price went up? But you can only do that if you challenge yourself to really look at root causes and go deeper. And sometimes that's fairly straightforward. In this case, maybe finance just had to ask for the contract and then the contract from the year before and then compare the prices to each other. But oftentimes this also involves business partnering. So talking to the budget owners, talking to the people who actually spend the money, who are closer to the day-to-day, and share the variance and say, look, we have this variance here. Do you have any idea what might drive this? And then you might, it might be things that they know that's not captured in any system at this point. So that's the what, the why, and the so what framework. And really the takeaway here is that I encourage you to not stop at a shallow explanation, but take it a step further until you can make a concrete recommendation. Because I do think that this is really how FP&A teams add the most value, which is by saying that, okay, I'm not just flagging the variance, I'm making a concrete recommendation, which is we should run a tender in this case.
Nice. I really, I love the so what. And so now that we're all on the same page, what techniques do you recommend finance teams use to discover the so what?
Yes, so this is where sometimes it can get challenging, and you won't always get to the so what for every variance you're looking at, and that's okay. But I want to give you a few tools that allow you to really go deeper into doing this. And the first one is called business driver tree analysis. It's one of my favorite analysis techniques, and we discussed leading indicators already. Business drivers are closely related. It's the leading indicators that have a significant impact on your business. They could be qualitative, they could be quantitative. And business driver tree analysis is a systematic way to uncover those underlying root causes. But actually, it's easier if I show you an example rather than just talk about it. So give me a moment while I pull that up.
No problem. Allow me just to briefly. So for anyone that joined late, I see a couple questions already in the chat. Don't hesitate to drop them. We will cover them at the end of the session. So I encourage anyone, don't hesitate to ask any questions, because I'm sure, many other people would probably share the same questions as you. So sorry, Christian.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, please don't hesitate to put the questions in the chat or in the Q&A box. Happy to answer them later. And so business driver tree analysis. I want to use an example that everyone's familiar with, which is that of a restaurant, right? Because I think, everyone in the call has been to a restaurant before. You have an idea of how that business works. So let's say we want to understand profitability. And so when it comes to profitability, what influences that is costs and revenue. And what we want to do in the business driver tree analysis, we want to ask why questions repeatedly to uncover what the business drivers are, what causes things. So if we drill a level deeper here, then we have different reasons for why costs can change and revenues can change. And I'll read them to you in case you're on the phone. It's a bit difficult to read. When it comes to the cost side of things, it could be waste management, it could be the cost of the food itself, management overheads, energy efficiency, rent and maintenance, operational costs. And that layer, if you share that, this might be your variance analysis, but it's not deep enough. Because let's say, food cost is your reason why we missed the forecast for costs in that restaurant. If you just say it's food cost, it's not actionable. It's not detailed enough to actually point to an action. And so if we go a level deeper, we might say that food costs are driven by two things: labor costs and supplier negotiations, right, for the raw material. And you would, if you built this for your own business, you would do this analysis for every driver. In this example, I just show a few examples. Operational costs can be broken down into marketing and licenses. And on the revenue side, the number of customers can be driven by the location, the menu, the marketing, and the menu pricing. The pricing affects the average spend per customer, as does the upselling techniques. But then this is still not sufficient. This still doesn't help you to really uncover the so what. And so if you go a level deeper, an example of labor costs, you have staff scheduling, wages, and employee efficiency that drive that. And now we're getting closer, because if you get that far, you could say, maybe, staff scheduling, if that's driving it, maybe we need to get a new software to do that. But you can go even deeper. So you can say, okay, what's actually driving staff scheduling? And it could be employee turnover, it could be incentives, or it could be the scheduling software, right? So don't rush and implement the software if you haven't yet understood what's actually driving it. But now you get to a point where this becomes very actionable and where you can use this for decision making. And so this is an example of a restaurant chain. Now that you understand how it works in general, actually, I also want to show you another example, and that's for a subscription software company. So if you have a subscription software company and you want to understand revenue, then you have the number of sales on the left and the average price per sale on the right. And then if you just follow in the left the number of sales, you can have marketing campaigns. They are driven by your budget and the cost per lead, but that's not really a root cause yet. Cost per lead can be driven by the channel mix or market trends. And then when you look at the channel mix, you can break it down further into where you're actually spending the money. Maybe it's Facebook ads, LinkedIn ads, YouTube ads. And now we are at the point where we can actually discuss decision making, because if you find that your revenue is off because YouTube ads all of a sudden became more expensive, then maybe it's time to shift money from YouTube to, let's say, LinkedIn, right? If that has a better return on investment. So now it gets actionable.
Cool.
So those are two examples, and my recommendation is definitely, go ahead and prepare this for your part of the business. And, the first time you do this, it can be time consuming, but I think it's worth it, because once you have it, you can just put it into your drawer, or of course leave it on your computer. And every month you're doing variance analysis, you can pull it out, and then you have a systematic way of checking, is this it? No. Is this it? No. Oh, this might be driving my variance right now. And you can use this to guide you when you are looking at getting the data and which metrics to look at, and also to guide your conversations with business partners. And after you've done it once, of course, you refine it every time you run a variance, because you probably come into situations where there's something new coming up that you haven't captured yet. But then you can include that here, and then over time, this becomes more and more useful and will not just speed up your variance analysis, but I'd argue also make it more meaningful and more impactful.
Really, really cool. I am pretty visual, and I think this helps. When you see it so clearly, it helps ask your questions, and then as you were going through those examples, it made a ton of sense. So thank you very much for sharing it. In addition to the business driver tree analysis, is there another technique you recommend finance teams to use?
Yeah. So a common challenge in variance analysis is that you may have an idea of what could cause the variance, but you aren't sure if there's actually real causation there. So to take a step back, there's correlation and causation, right? They're not the same. So an example I like to use to explain this is in the state of Maine, and this is true. Data scientists stumbled on that. In the U.S. state of Maine, for over 10 years, there was a 98% correlation between margarine consumption and divorce rates. So when people consumed more margarine, they had more divorces.
Oh my God.
Does it mean that if you want to have a good marriage, you should stop eating margarine? Probably not, right? So that's an example of, if you have a lot of data, you can find correlations that don't necessarily mean there's a causation. Mm-hmm. And when it comes to figuring out what actually is a causation, there's two approaches really to do it. One is to figure out, okay, can I think of a potential mechanism, right? Something that could cause that connects the two. And when you think about margarine and divorce rate, probably I would be hard pressed to find a mechanism, right? Probably you don't find a mechanism. And the other approach is to do a statistical analysis. And I know that most of you are finance professional. Probably most of you don't have a degree in statistics or in math. And that's fine, because there are techniques you can use that aren't very complicated, but that can help you statistically measure whether there could be a causation here. And a technique I like to do that is difference in difference analysis. But actually, before I go there, Adar shared in the chat that a scatter chart can reveal those causations. Thanks a lot for sharing that. That's a good point. So for those of you who don't know that, a scatter chart or a scatter plot is a visualization that has each data point as a dot. And then you see how the dots are grouped. And if they are resembling a line, if you say on the x-axis is ice cream purchases, and on the y-axis is the temperature outside, right? And then you see all the dots are on a line. It means that probably if it's hotter, people eat more ice cream, right? But what's cool about the scatter plot, by the way, and thank you, Adarsh, for bringing that up, is that it also shows outliers. So because you could show the correlation just as a line, but if you have outliers, and those dots are clearly visible in a scatter plot, and that can also be important. But if you do this, in the case of ice cream and sun, you can think about the mechanism. So people are hot and they want to have ice cream. So it's pretty clear that there is true causation. But in other cases, it's not that clear. So let's bring it back to the difference in difference analysis. That's a tool I wanted to share.
All right.
And so actually for this, I have a slide, and then I'll show you how it works. So the difference in difference analysis, how it works is essentially you need to first identify a treatment group and a control group. So this is also how scientists go about when they want to, test if a drug is working or not. They give the drug to some people, and other people get a placebo. So they get a fake drug that doesn't really do anything. So they have a treatment group and a control group, and then they compare them to each other. In business, it's hard to give people a placebo, right? It's hard to give people an ad that's not an ad, right? So instead of using a placebo, how we do that in business is that we apply the treatment. So let's say the treatment is a new website, right? Your business has a new website, and you wonder if that's driving more conversions. So you could say that you launch the website just in half of the countries or half of the geographies that you're doing business with. And in the other half, you keep your old website. And then you have a treatment group and a control group. You just need to make sure that those groups are very comparable otherwise, It might even make sense to randomize those, who gets the new website and who doesn't get the new website. And then you establish the before and after periods. So you're collecting data of before the intervention and after the intervention. You collect and prepare the data. You calculate the differences. Then you calculate the difference in differences, and then you interpret the results. That may sound a bit theoretical. So here I also want to show you a concrete example in Excel of how you can do this. So let me bring this up. So this is the solution of an exercise I did in one of my training programs, where I asked people to do this hands-on, the difference in difference analysis, but I'll walk you through what it looks like, because that makes it easier to understand. So the first sheet here is where we collect the data. So we have region, we have whether it's treatment or control, we have the period, the month, and the monthly sales in dollars. And we have a few regions. So we have regions 1A and 1B. So there's a treatment and a control group in that region. And we have a second region with the same region 3, 4, 5, 6, all the way to region 7. And in each region, we have a treatment group and a control group. So the treatment group is the one who would see the new website, and the control group doesn't. Mm-hmm. And then we collect the data. In this case, we collected 6 months of data, the sales. And then you just throw that into a pivot table. It's not rocket science. You filter for the before and after, the control and the treatment. And then you calculate the differences. So you calculate what's the difference between treatment and control before you launch the new website, And then you calculate the difference between treatment and control after you launch a new website. And what we see here is that the difference is much greater after the intervention. There's a $670,000 difference.
Mm-hmm.
So that points towards that there actually is a causation of sales going up from doing this intervention, from launching this website. And then I would take it a step deeper and actually look at this by region. And this is where it sometimes can get a bit messy. I mean, whatever is really black and white in business, right? There's always some gray. And in this example, we see that for region 5, we actually have a negative result of the difference in differences, meaning that before we had the intervention, there was a bigger difference than after between the control and the treatment group, which is not what we were expecting. But then you also have to do a bit of a qualitative interpretation. And by the way, if you have a data scientist on staff, I would definitely run that by them as well. But here we can see that all the other regions have a high positive variance. And that then lets me to conclude, I think the conclusion then is clear that, yes, there seems to be a causation and this one region is an outlier. So I would probably take a look at this region again, just to be sure, to see, are there any other differences between the control and the treatment group that we didn't pick up? Because you want to make them as similar as possible, but sometimes, you miss something. There's something else that went on in that market. And so you can dive into explaining that. But overall, I would still see the results as valid by even when you drill down on the region level. And so the difference in difference analysis can be powerful. And really what the key is, you need to basically make sure that your team, before they launch something big, they do this experiment where they don't launch it to the entire market, but do this. It's also sometimes called A/B test, right? Where you roll out the thing, the feature, the product, whatever it is, to just a subset of the market, so you can compare it to the rest. And yeah, even just encouraging the team to do more of these results, of these experiments, can make a big difference. And now you know that with difference and difference analysis, you can analyze the data and come to conclusions about causation.
Pretty cool. At some point, I'm curious actually if you get the data on the Mandarin consumption, but we will leave that for another day. The time is flying. Have 2 last questions. I already see that few people, left some comments and questions on the chat. So also mindful of that. Let's go for the next one. Sometimes even the best analysis techniques don't get you far because your perspective is to narrowly focus on internet metrics or something like that. No, benchmarking against competitors can help finance teams leaders see that more is possible. What are some of the best practices to get started with benchmarking?
Yeah, I get the question a lot because benchmarking is one of those things that often we don't do enough of, right? Because one of those things that are important but not always urgent. It can get urgent once you actually have done it and you see that there are big differences. But when it comes to benchmarking, start by defining the objectives, identify the KPIs, what you want to measure. And then select the competitors. And this is also an area where sometimes people oversimplify things, because you don't just want to compare your performance to your direct competitors. I'm sure you know who they are. But often it also makes sense to compare it to your indirect and best-in-class competitors. So what it means is, let's take a company that probably most of you know, Nintendo, right? There are a video game producer that just launched a new console, and their direct competitor in the video game space are Sony and Microsoft, right? But there are also indirect competitors. So for example, Netflix, I would argue, is an indirect competitor, because if someone watches Netflix, then they're not playing video games. right? So if all of a sudden these streaming services like Netflix become more prevalent, then probably Nintendo has to worry, because it means that they have less free time to play their games. So those are indirect competitors. But then Nintendo might also want to look at other best-in-class companies that they don't technically compete with directly, but that are just doing very well in a similar space. For example, Apple. Right? Apple doesn't make video game consoles, but they are one of the most successful hardware producers out there. They're exceptional at branding, at marketing. And so Nintendo might actually look at companies like Apple as well when they're doing their benchmarking. Then you collect the internal and the external data. And this is also where sometimes you might run into issues. Where do you get the data from, right? And when it comes to external data, I would point you to earnings releases of public companies. Even if your main competitors aren't public, I would still look at companies in your industry that are public, because they're sharing a lot of information. Each quarter, if they're listed at a US stock exchange, they have to share a deck that details their financials. And even more useful is the call that they have to do on a quarterly basis with analysts, because there, the analysts, they try to build their own models and do their own benchmarking. And so they grill the CEO, they grill the CFO with as many questions as they can come up with. And so you can learn a lot from that. But of course, you can also purchase benchmarking data sets. Usually it's possible to get kind of a trial data set with very few data points, because you want to make sure that it's actually useful for you before you're making the purchase. But that's an option as well. And then you conduct a quantitative and qualitative analysis. But also here, I wanted to share a quick example to make this very concrete and to show you what you can do with benchmarking analysis. So, and this is also taken from one of my courses. So this is an exercise I gave my students, and I asked them to say, okay, assume you're Netflix, right? Assume you're finance manager working at Netflix, and you want to benchmark yourself against your competitors, Disney Plus and Hulu. So they're providing video streaming services. And this data here, by the way, I got this all from public sources. It's the real data. And then once you set this all up in Excel, so you pull it from the different websites and then you consolidate it, there's a few things you may notice. For example, you may notice that Netflix has a much higher revenue than Disney Plus and Hulu. Netflix has 8.9 million in Q4 23, and Disney only has 2.2 million, and Hulu has 1.7. I think that's probably billions, actually. 8.9 billion and 2.3 billion. And then the other thing that stands out is the growth rates. So Netflix has a much lower growth rate than Disney Plus, so less than half, 13% versus 27%. Hulu is lagging behind. But then it gets even more interesting when you look at their revenue per subscriber. So Netflix has a much higher revenue per subscriber. And then if you look at Hulu and Disney Plus, we're actually one company. When you look at their profit and loss statement, you will see that operating income is negative, but it's improving quarter over quarter. So far, we're only looking at data. It's not a real insight yet, right? But if you connect everything I just said, then maybe you might come to the conclusion that Disney Plus is working really hard on increasing prices, right? Because they're not profitable yet. They're not making any money. They have a negative operating income, but they're trying to improve it every year. And we can see that because they've raised prices significantly. So in 2022, they were at $6 per subscriber roughly, and globally in Q4 they're now at $7. So they significantly increased it. So if I'm Netflix, I would probably look at this and make the conclusion that in 2024 they will probably increase prices again because they're not profitable yet. And knowing this from the benchmarking, I could then plan on, okay, when they increase prices, we want to bring out an ad that says, oh, they raised prices on you, come over to Netflix, right? And try to grab some of their subscribers. Maybe you might even do a discount during that time, and you can prepare for that. And actually, now we're in 2025, we have the advantage of hindsight. That's exactly what happened. So in 2024, Disney increased their prices again significantly. And if Netflix had done this analysis in early 2024, they would have had a good chance of getting that from the analysis.
That is really cool, Christian. At the end, one of the things that I love about when I saw you doing this with public data is that it just requires you to do the work. And sometimes, you have the tools. Now you know a little more. All of us know some more tools that we can use. It's just making the effort, doing the job, and looking into the numbers. Last question from my side, and I'll run slightly over the time for questions, but we will take care of those. Don't worry. Another common analysis task is looking for ways to cut costs without sacrificing growth. That's what all companies want. We want to grow more, probably spending less. Can you share some tips that help finance teams identify cost-saving opportunities?
Yes, and I'll share a few tips with you quickly because I also want to make sure we have time for questions. But it's a question that you often get in finance where, maybe the company isn't doing as well as it used to, or, there are some funding sources that have dried up, or there are tariffs, and you need to figure out how to improve your profitability so you don't have to pass on that much to your consumers in terms of the negative impact. And often it happened to me a few times in my career that my boss came to me and said, okay, can you figure out how we can save money without ideally harming the top line? Right. And that can be challenging. And so I just wanted to give you a few thought starters before we go to questions. The first one is zero-based budgeting. So if you haven't done that yet, I would definitely encourage you to take a look at it. Zero-based budgeting basically means that you go through all of your expenses and you see how are these likely to impact my results. And if you have expenses that are maybe overpriced, then you can quickly find them out. You can quickly see them here. It's effective because there's this thing called status quo bias, right? Where you keep using the same vendors over time just because you've always used them. And zero-based budgeting can identify that. Also, separating between long-term and short-term items can make a big difference, because sometimes you may find that you are investing too much into the long term, and with that I mean maybe you're spending a significant amount of your marketing budget on creating awareness or doing things like Super Bowl ads, right? I worked at a company who did that every year. That can be in times of where you need to drive efficiency. Maybe you want to rebalance that relationship. Asset wear out, that's another common one where you're changing your ads too quickly, and changing ads always costs money, creates additional uncertainty. So maybe you can just keep running your existing assets longer than you did in the past. Testing, we talked about that in detail. See if you can do more A/B tests, do more difference and difference analysis to figure out what really moves the needle, and then you put your resources behind that, and you don't do the things that don't work as well. Pareto analysis. So what are the 20% of the activities that tend to drive 80% of the sales? You'll find it's really fascinating because you find it in nature, you find it in business, you find that everywhere, that a small set of the things give you 80% of the results. But if you're trying to get to 100%, you have to spend another 80% of the resources, which often doesn't make sense. Compare non-salary and benefit teams by team. So what I mean with that is your salaries are probably your biggest items, but you maybe giving out benefits to people that nobody's using and people might not need. So it can be helpful to compare those and see maybe you can help people by giving them the benefits that they actually need and taking those out that people aren't using. Actually, yeah, I have that here as well. Run benefits poll people on what they would like to get in terms of benefits, and then you can often find opportunities to save costs without really negatively impacting what people are looking for and what people like. Reduce product complexity. That's also another big one, especially if you're a company that sells many products. So I used to work in consumer goods. Procter & Gamble had thousands of products, literally. But they were often very hesitant in eliminating those that aren't working well enough. But they still create complexity, they create costs, and so sometimes that can make a big difference. Automating support processes can make a big difference, of course. And then this is maybe less obvious, but don't squeeze the balloon. So what I mean with that is when you're taking expenses out of a part of the company, sometimes what happens is that expenses in another part go up because people find trade-offs, and those trade-offs can sometimes be even more costly than the thing they did before. So you want to make sure that you don't squeeze the balloon and monitor expenses broadly. And then lastly, anchor the savings. So even if you do, and that's why I have the 11 here instead of 10, even if you do your job well with identifying these cost savings, if you don't find a mechanism to anchor them, they will just keep coming back. So performance evaluation frameworks can be a great way to do this, incentives, variable compensation, to make sure that the changes you made are actually persisting over time and don't come back to haunt you later. And yeah, so that was just a really quick dip into identifying cost savings. And I hope that some of these points on the list help you come up with some ideas.
Love today's session, Christian, how tangible and insightful it's been. Now, let me go over the questions that we had from the audience. Let me see what the first one is. Lucas, what's the optimal level of detail for a driver tree analysis? Where do you draw the line in being too granular? Good one.
Great question. So, yeah, because the thing is, you can ask endless why questions. And the rule of thumb I give people is keep asking why questions, keep asking additional boxes on your business driver tree until you can point to 1 to 3 possible things that the company might be doing. Because the thing is, if you say, to take an extreme example, you stop at, it's marketing activities that cause the miss in revenue. There are a million marketing activities that could be driving this, right? But if you drill deeper and say, well, it's because our YouTube ads aren't performing as well anymore, now there are a very limited number of things that you could be doing. To give a different example, let's say you figured out that it's driven by just 3 customers that ordered less than in the past. So take a B2B example. Then also there's a very clear action that you can take, which is, for example, you could have people call those customers and ask whether that was a one-off that they reduced their utilization or whether they that will go back to normal in the next month. So yeah, keep asking those questions until you can make a concrete recommendation.
Thanks, Christian. I'm going to try to put 3 of the questions that we got together. Hopefully I can do a good job, because there is few more on the tree analysis. So on one hand, Pao was asking, how can we identify the most relevant leading indicators for an industry? And Arish, hopefully I pronounced the name right, can you give a concrete example for BNPL industry? And then Michelle was asking, how do you build a business driver tree analysis when you arrive in a new business with your business partners, or you use ChatGPT? I think we can have those 3 more or less tangled together.
Yes. So I walked you through ChatGPT at the beginning for the leading indicators. Can also be used in the exact same way for the business driver tree analysis. But you need to build your business understanding, right? You need to understand what's going on outside of finance. And there are a few different ways to approach this and to learn as quickly as possible, especially when you're new at a company. So the first thing I would recommend you do is start with what you already know. So go through your P&L statement that you're responsible for. And for each line item that you see, ask yourself, how are people in the company trying to influence that? Right. So if it's revenue, what are people in my company trying to do to make revenue go up? Right. And what have they tried? What strategies do they have? What tactics to go after those strategies? What's working? What's not working? And as you ask yourself these questions, you probably come to a point where you can't answer some of them. And that's fine, because then you just write the questions down and you can answer, and go and ask your business partners about that the next time you meet. It's another use case for AI, by the way. You could say, hey, I'm working in this company, I'm working in this industry. What are possible questions I could ask my business partners to better understand the business model and better understand how the company works? It will give you many questions. And the other approach is just try to join more operational meetings that the people across the business already have. So see, even if you're not contributing anything, just see if you can listen in where people talk about performance. Maybe they have a weekly meeting, they have a monthly meeting. Join that, and whenever you don't understand something, write it down. Then ask someone for lunch, and over lunch, ask people, okay, can you just walk me through this project you talked about? How does that work? And then you gradually build up your business understanding, and then identifying those business drivers and leading indicators becomes a lot easier.
Cool. Thank you. Okay, 4 minutes. This is a funny one. Can you give us a case where you incorrectly identified the relationship or drivers and later made adjustments?
Huh. Yeah, that happens sometimes. So when I worked at Squarespace, a website builder company, a software as a service company, we often struggled with, when we saw sales go down, is it because, or let's take the opposite, it's easier. Let's say we see sales go up all of a sudden. Is it because people did a trial and then this new feature that we just launched, they love it, and that's why more people decide to sign up to the trial, or to sign up for the paid product? Or is it because marketing did a good job because they drove really high intent people to the trial, which they always try to do? And so is it product who should get the praise, or is it marketing who should get the praise, right? That's a challenge. And I use that example because I also I didn't say this earlier, it's not always a science, right? Sometimes it's an art, and sometimes you just can't know for sure, and you have to make some assumptions, and you have to move forward with that. And in our case also, we didn't always have a clear-cut answer to what it is, because we're doing so many things in parallel. And I had to learn that it's not always black and white. It's not always a science in finance, right? Even though we try to make it a science as much as possible, sometimes it's an art, and you have to make assumptions.
Thanks. Let's see if we have time. We have a few more. That's gonna be fun. I'm going by first in, first out. But by the way, trying to be as fair as possible. Have joined a startup company as FP&A associate 1 week ago, and within the onboarding, the management is restructuring by reducing number of employees. When I asked, I was told their impact contract was terminated, which affected the revenue stream. What advice can you give me so that can help me forecast and value the company accurately with proper drivers?
Okay, so you have a reduction in headcount, you have a reduction in forecast. So the most important thing here, Austin, is that you ask a lot of questions, especially since you're new to the company. I'm sure people won't hesitate to take some time out of the schedule and answer your questions. So try to get behind the numbers and really get to the story. Okay, why was there a restructuring? What was the goal of the restructuring? How were those employees selected? Right? Of course, very sensitive topics. You need to keep that confidential. But for us in finance to do a proper analysis, we need to know those things, because then we can connect the dots and we can do a much better job in doing our forecasting going forward. So please don't hesitate to ask those questions and really understand the why behind why did they do this in the first place? What were the decisions that they made along the way? Because then it will be much easier for you to understand the impact on the forecast going forward.
Yes, 100%. There were some comments also in the chat regarding the how relevant and how important it is to be close to the business, asking, business leaders. That is, 100%, right? It's being close to the business. Christian mentioned, at lunchtime, never lose an opportunity. Of course, work related on meetings 100%, but when you are on your day to day, if you have the opportunity to be working closely to all these business leaders or partners, ask them, talk to them. That will give you all the context, all the information that it's so relevant for you to understand the numbers. Christian mentioned, it's not a science, sometimes it's an art. So that is clear. So we are actually 1 minute over time. Before, I just wanted to make a key takeaways on today's session and thank Christian a lot by taking the time and making this, so at least from my point of view, so useful, insightful, and tangible. So few notes on our side. I think elevate your financial analysis from foundational concepts to sophisticated models like the business driver tree analysis and difference analysis to uncover deeper insights. I found it really useful and and easy to use. Learn how to step outside the finance silo and leveraging leading indicators to better anticipate business changes in today's uncertain environments and talk to people. I think that's another that we can add there. Understand how to effectively benchmark against competitors to broaden your perspective and identify opportunities. That was a really cool between Netflix and Disney Plus exercise, and the information is out there. Is making the effort, doing the job, looking into the numbers can provide so valuable insights. And acquire practical tips and techniques to pinpoint cost efficiencies without hindering business growth. That was those 11 steps or advice that Christian shared. Those made ton of sense for me. Asking you those relevant questions before addressing some of these difficult cost cutting discussions that you're gonna have to face. So Christian, thank you very much. I don't know if there's anything else you wanna to mention or share before we leave.
No, I really appreciate it, Jorge. Thanks for having me. And yeah, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. Happy to help you further if you need more help with this.
Thank you very much, Christian, and thank you everyone for attending. It was great to be with you today. So have everyone a wonderful day from all over the world.